History is all around us, but it's not always easy to see.
That's the case with a violent chapter in the history of Jasper County. The area would have a different look today, and Joplin might not have risen to prominence if not for the destruction of an entire community 140 years ago. Tonight, the story of the lost city.
And then this was a talk that I did, not from that period.
You'd have to dig deep through the Jasper County archives, where only the oldest maps show it ever existed. It was booming before Joplin was even born, one of the largest towns in Jasper County. But today, not a trace remains. The story of Jasper County's lost community begins miles away in another state, here in Fort Scott, Kansas. It was on these grounds in January of 1863 that the 1st Black Regiment joined the Union Army.
There were Union soldiers who did not like the idea of African Americans serving in the Union Army, and there were many who were happy that they were.
May 1863. The 1st Kansas Colored Volunteer Regiment left Fort Scott en route to Fort Gibson in the Indian Territory that would become Oklahoma. Along the way, the Union soldiers established a camp near Baxter Springs, Kansas. From there, a foraging party of both black and white soldiers was sent to collect corn from the Raider farm in Jasper County, Missouri.
The black soldiers are riding in the wagons. And when they get to the Raider house and they're unloading corn from the upstairs, the black soldiers, a number of them were upstairs. They'd put their weapons down against a fence, so they were unarmed.
According to local lore, this property is the exact spot of the horrific events that would happen next. The soldiers who foraged here were completely unprepared.
About 67 guerrillas burst out of the woods on horseback with their guns blazing and essentially ambushed these troops, surprised them completely. A lot of them couldn't get to their weapons.
The white soldiers on horseback or in the wagons took off, leaving them there, stranded.
And it's hard to say how many took refuge in the farmhouse and how many were just running through the fields and woods trying to get away. They were basically hunted down and gunned down, hunted through the woods like wild animals.
The commander stated that he found the bodies at the house had been stripped and that their heads, their skulls had been cracked open by clubs exposing their brains.
The Union soldiers that were killed and their bodies were mutilated by the Confederate partisan soldiers from Missouri, it had racial overtones.
18 U.S. soldiers lay dead in this very vicinity. Pretty brutal stuff.
Union officers at Baxter got word of the massacre and sent troops to retrieve the bodies. When they saw the gruesome remains, they piled the bodies in the farmhouse and burned it to the ground. But that was just the beginning. What happened next would change the course of Jasper County history and wipe a town from the map.
The look of Jasper County today was shaped in part by an act of violence more than 140 years ago.
That act led to the destruction of an entire community. Tonight we explain how as we go in search of Jasper County's lost city. Jasper County, May 1863. Confederate guerrillas ambush a foraging party of Union soldiers from Fort Scott, Kansas. 18 Union soldiers, most of them black, are massacred and their bodies are mutilated.
But what makes Sherwood fascinating and interesting, and from a national perspective, is that this could very well be the first time that black soldiers of the Civil War were basically massacred, mistreated.
Union Colonel James Williams is enraged by the carnage and orders retaliation. Everything within 5 miles of the site is to be burned to the ground. Within that radius is an entire town, Sherwood, Missouri.
There is an awful lot of local folklore that has been passed down. The only way, I think, to actually identify specifically to locate it is through a professional archaeological investigation.
Only a few of the oldest maps at the Jasper County Records Office show the town ever existed.
There's Sherwood, which was originally called rural.
Now, this is before Joplin existed.
Right.
The maps can only get us close. Sherwood was apparently west of the massacre site, but the physical evidence is now scarce. the mostly wooden structures were reduced to ash. Later, mining operations, farming, and erosion have erased virtually any trace from the exact site of what was once a thriving community.
The third largest town in Jasper County at that time, 250 estimated inhabitants right in the city limits, serving a general population in the whole region of about maybe 1,000 people.
Well, I think Sherwood could very well have been the Joplin, or a major player, a large urban area. Who knows?
Joplin's Historical Museum has a single brick that might be from the only brick structure in Sherwood, a schoolhouse that was under construction when the town was destroyed. But even the exact location of that school is unknown. The only certain physical evidence of the town is partly hidden in the underbrush and not in the town at all. The Sherwood Cemetery was outside the city limits.
Joplin was buried here, but they never...
The Sherwood residents buried here include Katharina Sullinger, a first cousin of Abraham Lincoln. This may be as close as we'll ever come to knowing the exact location of the lost city.
It's one of those tragic stories of a town totally destroyed in a brutal guerrilla war and never rebuilt.
But the story of the lost city doesn't end here.
The original 14 national cemeteries.
If it has an ending, it's in another cemetery, in another state, in another time, in the town where the story began. More than 120 years after the massacre that sparked a fiery retaliation, a single marker was erected in the National Cemetery in Fort Scott, Kansas. It recognizes the 18 American soldiers who died for a cause and never received a proper burial.
It's an integral part of African American history as well as American history. And this was done to honor them and remember them for the ultimate sacrifice which they paid. They gave their lives.
Of the 18 American soldiers who were massacred near Sherwood, 15 were black. No one knows for sure, but the Union soldiers might have recovered the bodies of the 3 white soldiers and buried them in Baxter Springs. A marker there bears their name. But the bodies of the black soldiers were simply burned at the massacre site at the order of the Union officer. Black History Month is a fitting time to remember the sacrifices made by these American soldiers right here where we live.